It's that time of the year again, and what better place to be than one where unnerving stories await? As always, pull up a chair and make yourself at home. They're waiting. It was a lazy autumn afternoon when my friend Sam texted me. She explained that she and our other friends, Jacob and Anna, were going to drive out to this secluded abandoned house for a Halloween-themed photo shoot. Sam had a knack when it came to photography, making it more of a profession as the days went on. And with her Halloween party coming up next week, I just knew she was itching to show off some new work. I gave it some thought, as I now heard my phone starting to chime over and over again in the background, due to Sam putting us all in a group chat. Yeah, the idea seemed like fun, but I couldn't help but feel a bit anxious that we'd be isolated in an unfamiliar old house. My eyes shifted back to the plethora of group texts, now flooding my screen as I shrugged my shoulders and replied way more eagerly than I felt. Heck yeah, let's do this. A little bit later, the three of us met up at one of our favorite restaurants to grab some food and drinks before carpooling out to the abandoned house. Sam made a good point of getting there before dark so we could scout the area and make sure all was okay before proceeding. We left the restaurant with plenty of light left and made our way out to the parking lot to hop in Jacob's Jeep. As we did this, Sam lugged over a fairly large box from her car with props and lighting that we'd all use for the shoot. From just a few of the items I saw in the box, I knew Sam was going all out with the effort. Fake cobwebs, lanterns, candles, pumpkins, skeletons, and skulls. She clearly wasn't settling for the bare minimum. We took off for the house, obnoxiously singing to some of our favorite songs and eagerly chatting as we built up anticipation for the evening ahead. As we rolled onto the dirt road, our voices gradually lowered, as did the volume of our music. It was still daylight out, but with the four of us knowing where we were headed in such a desolate part of the country, the setting couldn't help but still feel a bit daunting. The house could barely be seen from the road, although nothing but a speck off in the distance. We continued talking, sharing ideas, and Sam was talking about some of the plans she had for the photos. It was only a handful of minutes more when we rolled up to the house, and Jacob slowly pulled his Jeep to the side of the road. The building itself seemed to have withstood the ravages of time, its wooden walls bearing the scars of countless seasons, peeling paint and faded colors from another era, with remnants of rusted farming equipment laying about the yard. I couldn't help but wonder what stories this forlorn structure held within its time-worn walls. With cautious steps, we began to approach while the chilly fall air seemed to howl through the broken window panes. After we made our way around the perimeter, the next task was to make sure no surprises were waiting for us on the inside. There were no other vehicles outside, but sometimes you just never know. The house was a single story, and I have to admit that the layout seemed a bit strange. But it wasn't until we made our way around one of the walls and into what looked to be the old kitchen area that we all stopped. There were stairs that just descended into what we could only assume was a basement. There was no hatch and no separation of these stairs from the normal floor. It was odd the way it looked. Great, I picked an extra spooky location this time, didn't I? Sam said, as we all remained standing, our eyes fixated on the open and small stairway, as if expecting something to come flying out at us. I then noticed Jacob shake his head as he took out a flashlight that seemed to hold the brightness of 1,000 suns. He let us know that he would slowly make his way down, make sure all is clear, and then tell us. The light outside was slowly sinking, and with us all feeling uneasy about this unknown basement, We found it best to come to a conclusion now, before dark. I bit the inside of my cheek before speaking up. Yeah, I'll go with. Jacob and I proceeded with cautious steps towards the entrance, the only source of light being the bright beam he projected down the weathered stairs. The light cast an eerie glow, revealing only a fraction of the basement floor. Jacob took the lead, and we descended into the subterranean space. The air down there was cold, bitterly cold, and as he panned the light around the mysterious room, there wasn't a threat in sight. Cobwebs hung like drapes, and a thick layer of dust cloaked forgotten shelves. Broken down wooden crates lay scattered about, and there was an off, unmistakable musty smell. Despite the faint pattering of footsteps above us, as Sam and Anna walked across the main floor, the oppressive silence seemed almost too much. We soon made our way back up, with a sense of relief building, even as the setting sun dipped below the horizon. We all began helping with prep. Some more time went by, and it had fully turned to night. We had candles lit and props set in place as Sam clicked away with her photos. We were all joking around as always, having a chill time and good conversation. Then suddenly, Anna started to hush us. We turned to her with confused looks as she held up a finger and seemed to be listening intently. "I swear I heard something," she said. We exchanged glances and stayed quiet for a moment. I was about to make some sarcastic remark until her claim became true, and this time, we all heard it. A muffled, yet deep and barely noticeable thumping noise, coming from what sounded like underneath, as if something was knocking on the floor from the basement. It was steady and rhythmic for a few beats, then stopped. The four of us froze in place. "There's nothing here," Jacob whispered. "Both of us checked that basement," he explained, gesturing with his hands between him and me. It was clear now that all bets were off the table, but Jacob proceeded to grab his light with a confident swipe and head back towards the stairs. I spoke up in a hushed tone, asking him if he's crazy, but then Sam and Anna followed after him, and then so did I. Guess we all are. The bright light once again illuminated the stairs, this time a lot more menacingly, as the sunlight was no longer in our favor. It was quiet. The outside was quiet, and anyone trying to come in would have had to have gone past us. For some reason, we stayed looking down the stairs for a few moments longer, and right as we were about to turn away, it sounded like something ran up the stairs and directly at us. It was loud and aggressive. We all scattered. Sam and I nearly took each other out, and Anna almost dove right through one of the doorways. Jacob pushed us forward, as he was the one closest to the stairs, and we ran for the outside of the house, faster than we've ever moved in our lives. We couldn't put words to it. Couldn't say it was an animal or not, or maybe just the house settling, maybe the wind. There were no answers, just pure paranoia. With props still in the house and a few candles still burning, we had to collect ourselves enough to retrieve them. At this point, the fear was so bad we didn't want to be in the house or outside it. Even being around it was bad enough. We darted in quickly to grab what we could in a panic, and then rushed back out to the Jeep. We drove on the ghostly dirt road as the house's silhouette slowly disappeared from sight, once again becoming engulfed by the darkness. We all sat quietly, none of us knowing what to make out of such an encounter. With the haunting sound still echoing in our ears, we were left with an unsettling truth. Some mysteries are just better left unsolved in the pitch-black depths of the night. I grew up in the rural areas of the country. The vast rolling hills and hidden back roads were just a couple of things I loved about it out there. Simple, but it's what I considered home. I'd often head out on those worn roads to decompress, whether it be with a couple of friends or just by myself. One time, though, I decided to stray away from my normal route. I was feeling a sense of change and wanted to switch up the scenery I was so used to. I hadn't been driving for too long when I noticed an old, derelict house sitting in the middle of a large field. I didn't recall ever seeing this house before, and even if I had passed it sometime previously, I just figured my focus must have been elsewhere. As I got closer, I began easing my foot off the acceleration, letting my truck gradually roll to a complete stop. I sat there for a moment, strangely intrigued by this old and forgotten structure. A gentle rustling came with the steady breeze, and stronger gusts made cracks in the old wood whistle as I stepped onto the foundation of the house. It was a fairly small home, maybe something from the early 1900s. As I made my way through the door, I noticed a small fireplace in the living room and imagined how comforting this home must have felt when lived in. A warm, crackling fire lighting up the room. Some floorboards were missing in certain places, revealing the dirt floor underneath the skeletal-like beams. A hazy golden light danced on the walls as I began to venture down the skinny hallway that almost made me feel claustrophobic. The hallway had a couple rooms branching off it before ending at the kitchen and dining area. It wasn't until I came to the opening of one of the hallway rooms that I almost jumped out of my own skin. Outside, facing the window, was a scraggly-looking scarecrow. It wasn't like it was very close to the house, but at first glance, not knowing what it was, it looked as though someone was standing outside, stock still, peering into the home. I sort of chuckled to myself, feeling embarrassed and thankful that no one was there to witness my reaction. I know if one of my friends had been there with me, I wouldn't have heard the end of it. I looked back in the opposite direction, realizing that's why I hadn't noticed it coming in. It's out of view from the road, and on the opposite side from which I entered. Yet, I stared at the scarecrow for a minute, as its ripped clothing occasionally moved in the breeze. Silly thing, I said under my breath. I sighed and shook my head as I continued exploring, once again appreciating the character of this home out of history. There wasn't much to the rest of the way through. All the furniture had been plucked up except for a couple of straggling dresser drawers and a broken table in the little dining space. Nothing on the walls but old blanks and chipped paint, and a couple spots where old wiring was sticking through. As I noticed the golden evening light turning into a shady blue, I knew it was time to part from the house and head back to my truck. I started off from the kitchen area, making my way back down the hallway. As I passed the room with the large window, I backed up to glance at the strange scarecrow one more time, maybe as a way of acknowledging it for the scare earlier, or to make sure it was still there. But when I did, I noticed it was facing in a completely different direction than it was before. I felt goosebumps creep along my skin. I followed its gaze and found it to be looking in the direction I would have been had I just continued to my truck, as if watching me through the walls of the home. Is that why it was facing me when I first found it? I began going over logical reasons for this and I felt crazy. Was it the wind maybe, or had it been moved by perching birds that aren't so scared of this scarecrow now? I hurriedly walked outside to test my theories. The calm breeze from earlier had died down even more now, and there were no signs of birds around the home, or even flying about in general. I don't know why, but instead of just letting all of this go and leaving, I had this sudden urge to look around the wall. I felt like a little kid the way I was being with this thing, like some imaginary game of hide and seek. But as I peered around the corner, one last time for good measure, it was looking at me again. At that point I bolted, running from my truck and feeling as though any moment its tattered fabric would be grabbing at the back of my jacket. I didn't care how stupid I may have looked, a grown man stumbling over himself with absolutely nothing behind him. The fact I couldn't explain it, or come to terms with what was happening, was enough for me to hightail it out of there. I hopped in the cab and fumbled with my keys before accelerating down the dusty road. As I drove, I occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting that scarecrow to be standing out front of the house now, staring at me as I disappeared down the shallow hill and out of sight. A wave of chills washed over me again as I imagined it slowly turning in my direction the whole time I was there. But those are just things out of books and movies, right? There must be some kind of explanation, right? The rest of the way home I was engulfed in my thoughts as night fully crept across the land, a haunting feeling in my bones as I kept replaying the events of that derelict house out in the field. Something so subtle, but strangely terrifying. I think we all let curiosity get the best of us at some point in our lives, and for my friend Eric and I, this just so happened to be in October of 2020. The crisp autumn air carried a hint of pine and wood smoke as we approached the old abandoned house at the end of Hinsley St. The leaves had turned fiery reds, vibrant oranges, and enchanting golds, creating a beautiful canvas over the land. The misty gray skies seemed to make the colors pop even more, and despite the occasional sting from the soft breeze, we decided it was the perfect atmosphere to explore such a place. As you might already be wondering, we had heard from others in our small town that this place was supposedly haunted. It was your typical house at the end of the street ordeal, but I never really paid it any mind. Eric, on the other hand, was a thrill seeker, and when it came to stuff like this, he was always all over it. It was the season for it after all, with Halloween being just around the corner, and as usual, he talked me into going so we could investigate for ourselves. But little did we know that our adventure would be far more chilling than anything we would have imagined. The house was a dilapidated Victorian relic, its once lively paint now faded to a worn and cracked gray. Some vines had claimed portions of the exterior, with tendrils crawling up the walls like skeletal fingers, as if seeking to one day envelop the structure entirely. Windows, long and tattered, seemed to peer at us as we made our way up the road. I glanced over at Eric as we drew closer to the home, its appearance becoming a bit more intimidating up close. He just shrugged and began to chuckle. "Come on, man, we're committed now." And despite my uneasiness setting in, I reluctantly continued forward. The autumn breeze chilled our skin as we approached the old porch. The front door was slowly swaying on rusty, barely intact hinges, a faint yet haunting sound emitting from them with every motion. We checked around the outside of the property for a bit before circling back to the front and wandering in. As we stepped over the threshold, a shiver ran down my spine. I half expected the doors and windows to suddenly seal shut, trapping us inside. Outside of the rumors, this place was already creepy enough on its own. The floorboards groaned beneath our feet, echoing through the barren walls. Dust motes danced in the lighter parts, and foliage that made its way inside cast eerie, shifting shadows on the walls. There was still a good amount of furniture in here, all coated with a generous layer of dust. Old photographs and books lay in various places, as if beckoning to be observed. I could tell how stoked Eric was to be in this place, as he wandered about investigating all the old belongings of the home. As I made my way into what looked to be an old study, the sensation of being watched was immediate, undeniable. Then every room I entered seemed to have eyes of its own. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was lurking just out of sight. I shook the feeling to spare myself of any anxiety, and carried on. As the lonesome wind outside began to pick up slightly, it started to sing melodies through the home, and at times sounded like whispers, barely audible, brushing against my ears. I would turn sometimes, expecting to see a figure in the corner of my vision, but there was nothing. Eric and I regrouped as we contemplated going upstairs. The stairs were pretty worn away, but the second floor was still accessible, as long as we were careful. As we made our way up, the heaviness seemed to intensify. I glanced at Eric to read his expression, and he had an unsure look on his face. He gave me a look back as if asking me without speaking aloud if I felt the same. I nodded. We explored room after room, each one filled with remnants of a life once lived. A child's tattered teddy bear lay abandoned in one corner, a dusty wedding photo framed on a cracked dresser in another. It was as if time had frozen, trapping the house's former inhabitants in a spectral limbo. Makes you wonder why they just up and left. In one of the upstairs rooms, a large ornate mirror hung on the wall. I instinctively looked over as I noticed the movement from my own reflection, and for a split second, it almost looked like a distorted yet sinister grin was on my face. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The mirror was grungy and badly cracked, and the upstairs was even darker than the downstairs with the overcast weather. It had to have been a trick of the light, or something. I attempted to compose myself when I began to hear what sounded like a muffled, old-time radio playing somewhere in the house. It was extremely faint and sounded out of tune. I spun around with my jaw clenched as I stared across the way at Eric, who had been in another room. "Yeah, I hear it too," he said to me in a hushed tone. At that point, the sensation became overwhelming, suffocating. Panic set in, and we bolted down the stairs, practically leaping over each other as we did. We fled the house and stumbled back onto the road, our lungs heaving and hands shaking. The thing that really got me is that Eric isn't one to scare. He thrives off stuff like this, yet this is the first time I can recall seeing all the color instantly drain from his face. I had a strange feeling in my chest, and we began to quickly make our way back down the lonely road. As we left the property, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder one last time, my imagination painting a shadow in the window, watching us as we walked away, defeated. But instead, the house just stood there, quietly, a relic of another era. But we both knew we had not been alone in its decaying halls. We remained quiet for a good while before speaking on what we experienced, and although we'd like answers, we still haven't been back. Not sure if we ever will.